Emily Carter and Ryan Garrison smiled for photographs at Mark's wedding, hiding the truth that within a week they would turn his dream life into a death sentence by removing the brakes from his beloved red convertible. Mark Garrison had always been known as the man who seemed to have everything lined up just right. At 32, his construction business was bringing in steady contracts. His newly purchased home was the envy of his friends, and he had just tied the knot with Emily Carter, a woman who appeared to be the perfect partner. Their wedding had been a dreamlike summer event, with soft golden lights spilling over the neatly arranged tables, laughter echoing across the venue, and photographs capturing the glow of two people who looked destined to share a long and happy life. To the guests in attendance, it was the kind of love story that seemed untouchable. Mark had always been generous, and that extended beyond Emily to his younger brother Ryan. The two had been close since childhood, having leaned on each other. After losing their parents in a car accident when Mark was just 20 and Ryan still in high school, the bond between them was something people admired. Mark had helped Ryan open his own auto repair shop when he struggled to secure a loan, and though the shop was never a big success, Mark never once pressured him to repay the money quickly. Family came first for Mark. In the days following the wedding, life settled into a gentle rhythm. The honeymoon had been short, just a long weekend by the coast, because Mark had several business meetings lined up. Emily seemed content, spending time decorating their new home and speaking warmly to neighbors. She spoke of wanting to make their house a welcoming place, somewhere they could raise a family. Her voice carried a softness that made it hard to imagine anything but sincerity behind her words. Yet underneath her pleasant demeanor, there were layers Mark never saw. Emily's past was dotted with financial struggles she kept carefully tucked away. Before meeting Mark, she had accumulated a quiet mountain of debt, credit cards, overdue bills, even an old personal loan that had been sent to collections. She had become skilled at avoiding the topic, steering conversations toward lighter subjects whenever the possibility arose that Mark might learn the truth. Ryan carried his own burdens. The repair shop was bleeding money, and each month the bills piled higher. He'd taken out small loans from friends and even a payday lender, hoping to keep the doors open, but the business continued to falter. His pride kept him from telling Mark the full extent of his trouble. He saw the new marriage as a shift in Mark's focus, a move away from the brotherly loyalty that had always been there. In Ryan's mind, Emily would soon have more influence over Mark than he ever could. It was during casual visits to the house that a strange connection began forming between Emily and Ryan. At first, it was subtle, a shared complaint about Mark's stubborn work habits, a passing comment about the things he didn't notice. Over time, these conversations deepened into private discussions. Both carried frustrations, and both began to see the other as someone who understood their situation. They never openly spoke of harming Mark in those early moments. But the seeds were there. Two people with financial problems and a shared link to the same man's wealth. Mark remained oblivious. He was planning a surprise trip for Emily the following month, a scenic drive through the countryside in his cherished red convertible. The car had been his pride since his 20s, a vehicle he'd restored himself and rarely drove except for special occasions. He mentioned to Ryan that he wanted to have the car checked over before the trip, and Ryan immediately offered to do it at his shop. Mark took the offer as an act of generosity, never suspecting that this moment would set into motion a chain of events from which there would be no return. The first week of their marriage came to a close with smiles, gentle touches, and an unshakable sense of security on Mark's part. But behind his back, quiet thoughts had already turned into deliberate plans. What he saw as the happiest beginning of his life was, for two people he trusted completely, the perfect opening to bring it to an end. The plan began to take shape, with a simplicity that made it all the more dangerous. Emily played her part carefully, letting the days slip by without showing the smallest sign that anything was amiss. She spoke often about wanting to spend more time outdoors with Mark, telling him that their life shouldn't just be about work and routine. The idea of taking the convertible for a long drive seemed, to her, the perfect way to disguise what was coming as an innocent, romantic outing. Mark, always eager to please, saw no reason to suspect there was anything more to it than a wife wanting to enjoy the summer air. Ryan entered the picture with quiet precision. He made a point of stopping by the house, checking in with his brother, and keeping his tone warm and familiar. It wasn't unusual for him to offer mechanical help. Mark had trusted him with vehicles in the past, and his reputation as a skilled mechanic was well known in the family. When Ryan suggested giving the convertible a thorough inspection before the drive, Mark agreed instantly. The car, though rarely used, was old, and Ryan's offer sounded like nothing more than a brother looking out for him. Emily and Ryan didn't need long conversations to understand what the other wanted. Their separate financial pressures were a shared unspoken language. Ryan saw an opportunity to solve his shop's debts and secure money he could never earn on his own. Emily envisioned a future free of the constant fear of creditors and unpaid bills. Mark's recent decision to take out a life insurance policy, something he believed was a responsible step as a newlywed, became the key to making their imagined future a reality. The timing was chosen carefully. Emily suggested the drive for the weekend following their first week back from the honeymoon, framing it as a way to make up for the short trip they had taken. She let Mark believe it was spontaneous, a small celebration of their new life together. In truth, the date gave Ryan enough time to prepare the car while ensuring the accident would happen soon enough to keep suspicion low. When the convertible arrived at Ryan's shop, he kept the work area quiet and locked. He moved with calm efficiency, loosening a critical component of the braking system, something small, almost invisible to the untrained eye, but enough to ensure that once the car picked up speed, stopping would be impossible. He replaced a few minor parts to make the service look authentic, wiped down the body to leave no signs of tampering, and parked it in a way that would make it seem untouched. Meanwhile, Emily began shifting her money. She withdrew small amounts from her joint account with Mark, just enough to go unnoticed, and transferred them into an account only she could access. She rehearsed how she would act if the worst happened, picturing herself as a devastated widow who had been lucky to survive a terrible accident. She knew every word she would say to the police, every tear she would let fall. Ryan delivered the car back to Mark with a smile, casually mentioning that it ran beautifully. He avoided over-explaining, knowing that too much detail might draw attention later. Mark thanked him sincerely, unaware that his gratitude was being accepted by someone who had already decided his fate. The days leading up to the planned trip passed without incident. Mark worked late on a few evenings, still thinking about the contracts he had in progress, while Emily busied herself with decorating their home. To an outsider, they were the image of a newly married couple settling into a happy life. But beneath the surface, everything had already been set in motion. The car was ready, the road had been chosen, and two people he trusted without question were waiting for the moment when their plan would come to life. The morning of the drive arrived with a clear sky and a warm breeze, the kind of day that seemed meant for open roads and carefree moments. Mark woke early, eager to surprise Emily with a stop at a small lakeside cafe he had visited years before. He saw it as a quiet gesture, something that would show he was thinking about their happiness beyond the wedding rush and his busy work schedule. Emily smiled when he told her, her expression soft and approving, hiding the fact that she already knew exactly how the day would end. The red convertible gleamed in the driveway, polished and perfect under the sunlight. Mark took pride in the car, running a hand along the hood as he checked the mirrors and made sure everything inside was in order. Ryan's inspection had left the car feeling smooth and responsive during the short drive Mark had taken around the neighborhood earlier in the week. There was no hint of what lay hidden deep in the mechanics. The first stretch of the journey was easy and calm. They left the suburban streets behind, trading traffic lights for winding country lanes. Birds darted across the road ahead of them. The wind carried the faint scent of fresh-cut grass, and the sun cast long shadows through the trees. Mark's hands rested comfortably on the steering wheel, his mind far from anything that could resemble danger. Emily sat beside him, her hair catching the light, her eyes forward on the road. As they moved farther from town, the scenery opened into rolling hills and sharper bends. Mark shifted gears with practiced ease, the sound of the engine blending with the hum of tires on asphalt. Emily glanced at the dashboard from time to time, not out of casual interest, but to track the speed and the distance to the point she knew was coming. She had studied the route in her mind, aware of where the road dipped steeply and twisted without room for error day an hour into the drive. They reached that stretch. The hill ahead was long, curving, and steep, bordered by a guardrail that overlooked a deep ditch on one side. Mark began the descent without a second thought, his foot pressing the brake as they approached the first bend. That was the moment. The plan revealed itself. The pedal sank beneath his foot with no resistance, no slowing of the car. A flash of confusion crossed his face, quickly replaced by alarm as he pressed again, harder this time. The convertible continued to pick up speed. The road demanded precision, but the car refused to respond. Mark's grip on the wheel tightened, and the muscles in his arms strained as he tried to keep the vehicle steady. Emily's hands clutched the seat beside her, but she made no move to reach for the wheel or shout for help. Her stillness was almost unnatural, her eyes fixed ahead as though she had already accepted the outcome. The first bend came too fast. The tires screeched, the smell of burning rubber filling the air as Mark tried to steer through it. The car swerved, kissed the guardrail, and jolted violently. The impact pushed it sideways, the momentum carrying it into a roll. Metal crumpled, glass shattered, and the convertible came to rest on its side in the dirt below the road. Silence followed, broken only by the ticking of the cooling engine and the distant rush of the wind above. Passers-by pulled over, scrambling down the slope. Mark lay motionless, his body twisted unnaturally, the life already gone from him. Emily, covered in dust and with a shallow cut on her arm, sat upright in her seat, breathing hard but alive. When help arrived, the scene was framed as nothing more than a tragic mechanical failure on a dangerous stretch of road. For everyone but Emily and Ryan, the story seemed complete. The initial investigation into the crash was swift and, at first glance, straightforward. The rural road had a reputation for being unforgiving, and the guardrail where Mark's car went over showed deep gouges from previous accidents. The responding officers noted the absence of skid marks, which fit the idea of sudden brake failure. Emily, wrapped in a blanket and still dusted with debris, gave a measured account of what happened. She told them Mark had been in complete control until the brakes just stopped working. Her voice trembled in the right places, her eyes glistened, and she appeared to be a woman barely holding herself together. The sympathy from those present was immediate. The convertible was towed to an impound lot for a mechanical inspection. It was routine procedure. Any fatal crash warranted a closer look. In the meantime, Emily stayed with a friend, her injuries minor enough that she was discharged from the hospital the same day. She made several phone calls to relatives, her tone somber, yet in private she allowed herself moments of quiet relief. She knew the risk of discovery was low, at least for now. Ryan played his part without hesitation. He showed up to the impound yard under the pretense of offering to help the investigators understand the car's mechanics, claiming he had worked on it days before. His presence was framed as concern for his brother's memory, though in reality, it was a way to gauge how much the authorities knew. The mechanic assigned to the inspection accepted his input politely, but kept his own observations to himself. When the report came back, it introduced the first hairline crack in Emily and Ryan's plan. The brake system had not failed due to wear or sudden rupture. It had been deliberately compromised. A component crucial to maintaining brake pressure had been disconnected and left loose inside the assembly. It was not the kind of damage that could happen on its own. The findings shifted the case from accident to suspicion, and the file was handed over to the homicide division. Detectives began retracing the days before the crash. It didn't take long to establish that Ryan was the last person to work on the convertible. They also learned that Emily had been the one to suggest the drive, setting the date and route. The combination was enough to warrant deeper scrutiny. Financial investigators soon uncovered another troubling detail. Less than a week before the crash, Emily had transferred several small sums into a separate account that Mark was unaware of. On their own, the amounts might have been dismissed as routine expenses, but their timing raised eyebrows, especially when paired with the fact that Mark's life insurance policy, worth a substantial amount, had been updated to name Emily as the sole beneficiary just 2 months earlier. Still, suspicion was not proof. The detectives needed something tangible, something that placed both Emily and Ryan directly in the path of intent. That breakthrough came from a security camera mounted in the corner of Ryan's shop. The footage showed him working on the convertible. Late at night, hours after the inspection he had told Mark about, he could be seen removing a small part from underneath the car, placing it into his toolbox, and then wiping his hands with a cloth before locking up. The part in question matched exactly what had been found loose inside the brake assembly. When confronted with this evidence, Ryan denied wrongdoing, claiming it was part of a routine adjustment. But the explanation didn't align with the forensic report, and the detectives knew they were closing in. The narrative that began as a tragic accident was starting to unravel, and with each new discovery, the betrayal at its core became harder to hide. The arrests came quietly, but with a sense of finality. Detectives had spent weeks gathering every thread of evidence, ensuring there would be no room for doubt once the case reached court. Emily was taken first, early in the morning, pulled from her bed while the neighborhood was still asleep. She appeared stunned for the benefit of the officers, asking questions in a shaking voice, but she offered no resistance. Ryan was picked up later that same day at his shop, where he had been pretending to work on an old sedan. He tried to act surprised, but his eyes gave away a flicker of understanding. He knew the trail had finally led back to him. That in custody, both maintained their innocence. Emily spoke of her grief, repeating that she had lost the man she loved and could never imagine hurting him. Ryan leaned on his reputation as a devoted brother, suggesting that the investigators were trying to pin an unsolved mechanical problem on him simply because he had been the last to touch the car. But the evidence was no longer circumstantial. The recovered brake component from Ryan's toolbox matched the make and wear of the one missing from Mark's car. Bank records showed Emily's hidden transfers and her swift inquiries about the life insurance payout just days after Mark's death. The prosecution built a narrative that was as straightforward as it was chilling. Greed had driven the two people closest to Mark to conspire against him. They painted the picture of a man who had spent his life caring for others, only to be betrayed in the most calculated way. Photographs from the wedding were shown in court, the smiles on Emily's and Ryan's faces now serving as a grim reminder of their deception. The jury heard about the debts they each carried, the private conversations they had shared, and the deliberate tampering that ensured Mark would not survive the drive. Witnesses added weight to the case. A neighbor testified about seeing Ryan take the convertible into his shop late at night. Another recalled Emily mentioning, just days before the crash, how dangerous the rural roads could be if something went wrong with the car. These seemingly small details wove together into a pattern too precise to dismiss as coincidence. The defense tried to argue alternative theories, faulty parts, a misunderstanding of the financial transfers, and claims that the security footage was misinterpreted. But the mountain of evidence proved too steep to climb. The jury took less than 2 hours to reach a unanimous verdict. Both Emily and Ryan were found guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. Sentencing brought no relief to those who had loved Mark. Emily received life in prison without the possibility of parole, her calm demeanor in court never breaking even as the judge read her fate. Ryan, despite his attempts to portray himself as manipulated by Emily, received the same sentence. Neither offered apologies, and neither admitted to the plan that had destroyed a family. In the months that followed, the story spread beyond the local community, picked up by true crime programs and news outlets. It became a cautionary tale of how trust can be weaponized, how the closest relationships can conceal the darkest intentions. Mark's business was taken over by a partner, his home sold to settle remaining debts, and his name remembered by those who knew the man he truly was: loyal, generous, and unsuspecting to the very end. What began as a wedding week filled with promise had ended in a courtroom, with two people who had once stood proudly beside him now condemned for the deliberate theft of his life. The image of the red convertible, gleaming in the summer sun, would linger as the final symbol of a future stolen just 7 days after it began.